Well, recently NEBOSH released some new guidance on scenario-based assessments. So if you're sitting a NEBOSH General Certificate, this guidance relates to you and your NG1 or your IG1 open book exam. So where did I find it? Well, we just need to Google NEBOSH Scenario-Based Assessment Guidance and we'll find the link there. It's a PDF document, looks like this. And this has been around before, but it's just been updated. And there's a very interesting update in this, is that they seem to have removed a very large section all about the P principle, the point, evidence, explanation. The P principle is something that I bang on about, and NEBOSH all of a sudden seem to have just removed it all from the guidance. Not all of it, it's actually still in there, it's just kind of discreet. Let's take a look at this guidance. There's loads of interesting stuff in there. Give you a bit of an overview. So there's the contents. It's well worth taking a look at these bits here about the scenario, the questions and the broad types of questions, marking schemes and all of that. Some great examples of what good answers and bad answers look like, why answers get marks and why some don't get marks. Let's take a little bit of a tour. So first thing I wanted to look at is this section 5, the scenario, which talks about the different types of scenarios, talks about them being realistic and credible and so on. But there's quite an interesting bit here on page 6. It says here, when we develop these assessments, we subtly place signposts or clues in the text so that you can use your understanding of health and safety to interpret the clues and give correct technical answers to the question. Right, so they're putting clues in the text. Interesting. The next bit goes on to say, one of the main principles that we apply when writing scenarios is show, not tell. Show, not tell. This means that the answer will not usually be directly in the scenario. You will need to make a logical inference from the information given. Right, okay. So one of the big mistakes that a lot of students make on these exams is that they think that they can just go through the scenario and just spot answers. Oh, there's an answer, there's an answer, there's an answer, there's an answer. And don't get me wrong, sometimes there are questions where you can do that. Comment on the indicators of the health and safety culture. You could literally just point at various things that are going well or going badly, and you could probably get some marks that way. But on a lot of questions, it's not that obvious. You have to infer. You have to see a clue and deduce from the clue. I mean, I'm sounding like Sherlock Holmes now, aren't I? Yeah, there's a clue, you gotta deduce from the clue. Yes, it's like there's a clue to what's going on and you have to infer from that clue what's happening in the background. So let me give you an example. There's an example here. This supermarket was listed in the top 10 for sales last year, and the store manager wants to do even better this year. They have told shift managers that they do not care how it is done, but the supermarket must be in the top 5 this year for everyone to receive their bonus. Now, it doesn't say, oh, this is negative. It doesn't say the management value sales more than they value health and safety. No, it doesn't say that. It's a clue. You can infer that from what's being said. It says they do not care how it is done, but the supermarket must be in the top 5. We do not care how it's done. We don't care if we have to break all the health and safety rules in order to get there. We can infer from this that health and safety is a secondary priority compared to the sales. And it says here in the guidance, there's an emphasis on financial incentives at the expense of health and safety. It does not literally say this in the scenario, but it is a logical inference from what is written. So there's this whole idea about inference. Now, inference is something that they teach in primary schools. And so it's very difficult for me to kind of teach this on a NEBOSH course because most grown-ups can infer things because they teach this when you're 6, 7, 8 years old. You read a text and you infer things from the text. I know about this because my son really struggled with this when he first came across things. He kind of read things very black and white. If it didn't say it in the text, well, it didn't exist. So we've had to teach him along the way how to infer from the clues. It says here, for example, rather than stating in the scenario that the health and safety culture was poor or negative, there will be indicators in the scenario, such as statements about attitudes or the way things are routinely done. You must then use what you know about health and safety culture to interpret the clues and logically conclude what the culture is like. In most cases, you will need to support your conclusions using evidence from the scenario. Right, and this is where we start to get to the P principle. P principle, which stands for point, evidence, and explanation. So here, when you're being asked to comment on the culture, you could make a point. your point. Actually, NEBOSH here call it a conclusion, support your conclusion. So your conclusion could be the supermarket manager values financial performance over and above health and safety performance. Right, that's the conclusion. And then it says, in most cases, you need to support your conclusion using evidence from the scenario. So you then need to prove that what you're saying is true by quoting the evidence. And you can say, well, this is clear because they say they don't care how it's done, but we must achieve this financial target. They don't care how it's done. That could mean I don't care if we break the health and safety rules as long as we meet our financial target. Can you see there? We've got a conclusion, we've got a bit of evidence. You put them together, you start to get marks in the exam. If you'd like to sit your NEBOSH General Certificate with Compassa, why don't you just check out the links in the description below. We've got the world's only smart video course for the NEBOSH General Certificate. Pass rates well in excess of 80%. You should check it out, and also you won't be bored to tears. In part 7 of this document, there's a really interesting page talking about mark schemes, or what I call marking schemes, and how the marking schemes are developed. It says the mark scheme is, I don't even know how to pronounce that, iteratively developed, anyway, drop them in the comments. How do you pronounce that? Alongside the question. So they're writing a question alongside the marking scheme. And it says, in fact, the mark scheme is usually the starting point of a question development. The writer will have a broad idea of the question they want to ask when they begin to develop the mark scheme. So they're writing the mark scheme at the same time as writing the question, and the mark scheme, it says, must match the question so that they will go through many review cycles to ensure we have correctly captured all relevant responses. So they're saying there, it goes through multiple cycles of reviewing the question and how the question is worded and reviewing the mark scheme. All of the possible correct answers for that question are included on that marking scheme. But it also says here, because the mark scheme may contain evidence from the scenario, adjusting the mark scheme might also require adjustments to the scenario and vice versa. Right, okay. So they've written a mark scheme and say, well, that would be a correct answer to that question. Here's an answer. Wouldn't it be great if we could put a clue in the scenario which points people towards that answer there? Can you see how complicated writing a scenario question and mark scheme is, yeah? And then you get people like us, people like you, who dare to criticize NEBOSH for occasionally having something which is slightly unclear or something that is wrong, in your opinion. It's very hard to write this and keep everybody happy. In section 8, we start to see the P principle making a little bit of a reappearance here without being clearly stated. Section 8 is how much should I write? It says here that you should look at the number of marks available for the question as well as the command word. We'll talk about command words in a moment. If a question is worth 10 marks, then examiners will be looking for 10 unique, not repeated things. Okay, so what are those things that you have to say? Well, when you sit your exam, you'll get some instructions that look a little bit like this. And it says in the instructions, it says, in general, 1 mark is given for each correct technical point that is clearly demonstrated. So when I talk about the P principle, I'm talking about point, evidence, explanation. You make your point and you explain your point using some evidence from the scenario to prove that point. And so we say, in general, you will get 1 mark for every correct technical point, provided that point is on the mark scheme. And so if you were asked a question about what are the possible uninsured costs of poor safety performance in this organization, you'll get marks for things like sick pay and lost productive time and fines, compensation claims and legal defense costs and damage to equipment and so on. So those are the points that you make. But the guidance actually says a bit more. It says the examiners will be looking for 10 unique, not repeated things. These might be a mixture of points you are making, evidence you are citing, and explanations you are giving. Right, so in some marking schemes, and of course we don't get to see the marking schemes, only the examiner knows the marking scheme. In some of them, you might get a mark for making the points, and then for citing a relevant piece of evidence from the scenario, and you might even get an extra point for a particularly astute explanation, provided that explanation is in some way on the mark scheme. The mark scheme has all these secrets. So what does it mean? Well, it means, well, assume the worst. Assume that you will only get marks for the points. That's the first thing. So if it's a 10-mark question, write a minimum of 10 points, preferably 15. Because some of the points might not be right. So 10-mark question, write down 15 points. But don't just write the points. Make sure you apply the P principle. Make sure you explain that point. So if you were explaining how an organization could incur sick pay as a cost, as an uninsured costs, you could say, well, people could be injured, go off sick, and then we're required to pay sick pay to them so they can sit at home poorly and get better, right? That's your explanation of how the sick pay is incurred. And whilst doing that, you might be able to refer to evidence in the scenario. So for example, the scenario might talk about sickness absence levels being really high. And you could say, well, sickness absence levels are really high and they're increasing, which means that the levels of sick pay are increasing. And you might get a mark, if that's on the mark scheme, you might get a mark just for saying that. So what it means is that get your points down, use some evidence to back up your points, and then explain your point fully. And if you do that right, you should absolutely smash this exam, provided those points are actually on the mark scheme and you haven't gone way off track.
Stay on the road. Keep clear of the moors.
Some key things here is that the points must be unique. There are no marks for repeating the same point over and over again. It is not about quantity, it is about quality. Writing lots and lots of stuff doesn't necessarily mean you get more marks. I generally say you can get a mark in about 2 to 3 lines. 2 to 3 lines of text, something like 30 words, you can make a point, evidence your point, and explain your point. Just do it concisely. Anything more than 30, 40 words, you've probably gone a bit too far with it, to be honest. Here's another little tip here, it's got it in the guidance. It says simply copying and pasting paragraphs from the scenario and providing them as an answer in their entirety will not attract marks. Right, copying and pasting the scenario will not attract marks. Right, if you want to use evidence, don't just copy and paste the phrase from the scenario. No, use the evidence, but write it in your own words. The intention is to test the learner's ability to understand the health and safety implications in the scenario. Yes, that is just crucial, that bit there. It's like, this is why we should always explain our points. Don't just list things, because if you list things, you're not demonstrating any understanding. You are simply just demonstrating your ability to copy and paste things from a book. You're demonstrating knowledge, perhaps. But we're not interested in your knowledge. We're interested in whether you can apply that knowledge to a real-life situation and show some understanding of how the knowledge works in practice. Which means you should explain the points fully and link them to the scenario that you have been given. Anyway, on that note, why don't you go take a look at the guidance yourself? It's really quite well written, really quite useful. Just Google NEBOSH Scenario-Based Assessment Guidance. Skip past all the competitors, second or third link down. If you'd like to sit your NEBOSH General Certificate with Compassa, why don't you just check out the links in the description below. We've got the world's only smart video course for the NEBOSH General Certificate. Pass rates well in excess of 80%. You should check it out, and also you won't be bored to tears. Find the NEBOSH assessments hard. Is your course boring? Has it expired? Well, I'm an ex-NEBOSH examiner and I can help you. If you apply for Compassa's NEBOSH Rescue Package, you will get full access to the world's only smart video course for the NEBOSH General Certificate. It's got a first-time pass rate of 86%. It's studied online at a time to suit you. It's got loads of mock exam assessments, all graded by me with my personal feedback. So click on the link below to apply now.